I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. You know, budget stories don't really make for great TV. They involve a lot of numbers and a lot of ideas, many of which may never come to fruition. Nevertheless, we do think it's important and worthwhile to look at Governor Tina Kotek's budget that was released this morning. It's a proposal. It's also our big story. The governor's proposed budget comes in at the cost of $32.1 billion. Yes, with a B. That's over the next 2 years. That comes out to about $1.3 billion per month. Her top priorities: housing and homelessness, mental health and addiction care, education. When it comes to housing and homelessness, the governor wants lawmakers to act fast on approving $130 million for her homeless state of emergency. Here's how that money would be spent. $23 million would go to expanding shelters and growing the workforce. $54 million to get 1,200 people off the streets, including offering rental assistance. $33 million to prevent evictions, and another $13 million to support homeless people within Oregon tribes and expand sanitation services and support emergency response. But remember, that state of emergency only applied to parts of the state where homelessness had increased by 50% or more since 2017. Some communities, like Newport, for example, didn't meet that threshold, but still want help handling their homeless crisis. Our Blair Best asked the governor about that this morning.
The money allocated for homelessness, is that just for the areas of the state included in the state of emergency? And how do you plan to help those communities that aren't included?
That's a great question. Thank you, Blair. So as you know, we've been talking about $130 million, $40 million out of the current biennium, 90 into the next biennium to meet very specific goals around unsheltered homelessness in those priority areas. However, the rest of the budget also expands emergency assistance for the whole state. It talks about keeping people housed and preventing them from becoming homeless. That is good for the whole state. The affordable housing, the $1 billion in development, will meet the needs that will serve the entire state. So what I would say is we have some immediate short-term needs through the emergency order, but over the course of the next biennium, all parts of the state, and every part of the state has a homelessness crisis, is going to be getting help.
The governor's budget also requests hundreds of millions of dollars for housing programs. Those include things like long-term rental assistance, homeless shelters, and ongoing homelessness prevention programs. The budget also directs millions more towards permanent supportive housing. That's where people are given housing plus services to help them stay off the streets. But as the saying goes, wait, there's more.
I'm also proposing the creation of a new office called the Housing Production and Accountability Office. This office will provide technical assistance and support to local governments and housing developers working to reduce land use and permitting barriers that get in the way of building more housing.
Let's move on now to mental health and addiction care. This is a massive problem across the state, and we've featured some of the worst cases right here on The Story in recent weeks. Here's what Kotek wants to do about it if the legislature agrees.
That's why I'm proposing investments to disrupt the harmful and expensive pipeline of Oregonians who move from homelessness to jail or the state hospital. My budget aims to do this by increasing local residential treatment options, improving jail diversion services, and enhancing intervention and outreach before patients are civilly committed, closing gaps in behavioral health services for children and older adults, and expanding substance use disorder treatment for adults in custody. We also must stop preventable deaths from substance use and behavioral health needs. And we're going to do this in this way: providing more funding for 988 call centers to connect people with the nationwide suicide and crisis lifeline, supporting mobile crisis programs like Cahoots to divert individuals from hospitals and jails, investing in substance use treatment and services, addressing gaps in treatment by providing startup costs for residential detox and inpatient treatment, and reducing preventable deaths associated with opioid use by continuing support for the Harm Reduction Clearinghouse.
The governor said none of that is possible without supporting the essential behavioral health workers, which she says needs to be done with, wait, yes, you guessed it, more money.
We must increase wages for community health providers. My budget proposes doubling the Oregon Health Authority's Healthcare Provider Incentive Program, which would bring up to 1,000 new workers from diverse backgrounds into this pipeline by supporting loan repayment, scholarships, and other supports for licensed behavioral health providers and students. And to address the staffing crisis at the Oregon State Hospital, my proposal includes support to fund a sustainable 24/7 staffing model, establish a health equity unit to address staff needs, fund the complex case management unit so the most acute patients at the hospital can get the specialized care they need in safe and appropriate settings, and upgrade the facility to improve safety for both patients and staff. With these investments, help will be there when you or your loved ones need care.
And finally, education, where Kotek wants $9.9 billion in funding for schools. Her largest initiative is $100 million for targeted literacy strategies to ensure that young kids learn to read. There's also tens of millions of dollars proposed for building more preschools, pay raises for state-funded preschool providers, and money to help affordable child care. Now, when it comes to the state savings account or the rainy day fund, Kotek says those coffers currently hold about $2 billion. And so she wants to divert another $765 million that's meant to be going there and instead use it over the next 2 years. But like everything else in her proposal, lawmakers have to agree first. And that's the real crux of all budget proposals like this. There's a lot of things the governor says that you may or may not think are great ideas. But unless lawmakers agree to make it happen, the proposal is just that, a proposal. Now, when the proposal hits your desk and it's from the state's top executive, the chief executive, yeah, you're probably going to pay attention, especially when they're in your same party. But whether or not lawmakers can actually come to an agreement on any of it, well, that'll be determined in the next 4.5 months. Multnomah County's longest serving district attorney, Mike Shrunk, has died. He led the district attorney's office for 32 years from 1981 through 2012. He's remembered for many things, including starting a drug court for Multnomah County. At the time, it was only the second in the country. Now, to really get to know someone, it's helpful to talk with people who knew and admired them. Today, I was able to talk with a few of the prosecutors who worked for Shrunk. Here's John Foote. He went on to be a district attorney for Clackamas County until 2021.
Mike was a role model for anyone who wanted to be a professional prosecutor. It really mattered to him how you behaved and how you did things. And what really mattered to him was your judgment as a prosecutor. Mike believed in the rule of law, and he expected his prosecutors to follow it. He talked about it wasn't just not doing something that was inappropriate, it was even not getting near the appearance of impropriety. And we knew that. And I carried that with me my whole career.
Mike Shrunk grew up in a political family here in Portland. His father was Portland mayor at one point. But those who worked for him and with him said Mike Shrunk was careful to keep political leanings out of his decisions.
He didn't hew one particular political philosophy. His approach was we enforce the law. And we want to find justice if we can. Mike very quietly helped empower the crime victims movement in the 80s. He never got any credit for it, but he really was instrumental through Norm Frank and John Bradley. And the crime victims changed Oregon's criminal justice system. And as a result, violent crime went down to a 50-year low about 8 years ago.
Mike Shrunk did not appear on camera all that often, but when he did, it was important. Here's a clip from him in 2003 when the jails were so full and the budget so tight that a man arrested 17 times for stealing cars could not be put in jail. It seemed to almost physically pain Shrunk to talk about it.
We've tried to plead down as many cases as we can. This is horrible, some of the plea offers that we've been negotiating. And we've also, those that we just can't stomach, we've set over with the court's permission until the July.
He was saying until the July budget starts again. So you kind of get a sense there for him. We also reached Rod Underhill while he was out of town, which is why the video you're about to see is a little bit shaky. He worked for Shrunk for 25 years before becoming the Multnomah County District Attorney himself. He's since retired. He said Shrunk led by example and never forgot that both victims and the accused are humans.
I think that Mike would appreciate being recognized for his approach to public safety in our community, his approach including compassion, empathy for those individuals that we worked with and that were impacted by the public safety system, whether they be victims of crime, which were very important to him, and treating folks who were victim, of crime, treating them well and with compassion and empathy, as I mentioned, but also those individuals who were brought with charges that were brought against them relative to conduct in our community.
Mike Shrunk hired and trained a number of top prosecutors and professionals. Another one is Eric Bergstrom, who worked for Shrunk for 15 years before serving as a judge for 17 years.
Well, Mike was a great boss, a consummate leader. Mike had a kind of a strong moral integrity that was kind of like a North Star for the office. And he imbued in all of us this kind of the saying you've probably heard, do the right thing for the right reasons. And he really meant it. He also was very involved in the community. Everybody seemed to know him wherever you'd go. And he had a great sense of community. He never wanted the spotlight for himself, and he almost kind of encouraged his DAs to do the same thing. He would send us to different community meetings to deal with different things, but he would always say, lead from the back of the room. And that was his way of saying, if we get kind of what we're after at a meeting, don't take the credit, let somebody else take the credit, as long as we accomplish what we're doing.
I asked Bergstrom if he had a favorite story involving Mike Shrunk. He told me the office was always applying for grants so that they could do whatever they wanted despite their tight budgets. After the grant was up, then they would travel around and explain what they did with the money. One of his favorite memories is traveling with Shrunk to Las Vegas for one of those talks where everyone looked forward to hearing not him, but Mike Shrunk.
We got a grant to do a racketeering case on a gang, and we're going to Vegas, and they really wanted Mike to come talk. And they said we had 2 hours for the talk. So I met with Judy Phelan, who was his first assistant, or his kind of executive assistant. And I said, so when do I get together with Mike to go over our speech? And she goes, oh, that's never going to happen. Mike won't do that. You're going to have to just do it yourself. And I said, well, it's a 2-hour speech. How long do I make my portion? She goes, well, just make a 2-hour speech and then just cut it down by however long Mike talks. And so I said, okay. So I prepare, this is back when we had slides, and so I prepare this speech. I don't even fly with Mike. He just meets me in the room like 5 minutes before we're to go on. Mike talks for maybe 5 minutes and then turns it over to me. And so I speak for, an hour and 55 minutes. We get the reviews, people write reviews of the talk. All of them said how great Mike was. How much they love Mike Shrunk. He was a tough act to follow, literally.
They all said they're going to miss him a lot. I interacted with Mike Shrunk several times while I was a young reporter here. I remember one time running across the street in the middle of the block to ask him a question in front of the courthouse. He was friendly and then suggested it'd be a good idea to not jaywalk in front of him again. So I didn't, not in front of him anyway. I also remember him from the Lloyd Athletic Club in Northeast Portland. I used to work out there and would sometimes be in the locker room as Mike and his buddy Answer Haggerty, now a senior federal judge, would have just finished a handball or racquetball game. I'll never forget the joy they had with each other, laughing and teasing like they were little kids who just came off the playground. It was a great example and a reminder to me you can have a very serious job and still have a great time with your buddy. Mike Shrunk was 80 years old. When we come back, Portland police are condemning police officers in Memphis after the release of body camera video showing the beating of Tyree Nichols. But PPB's officers are still on the job without body cameras of their own. What's keeping the program from moving forward? When the story returns.
with broken hearts.
Today, local leaders gathered for a vigil in Northeast Portland to honor the life of Tyree Nichols and to pray for his family. Nichols is the Memphis man who died days after a brutal beating by a group of police officers. 5 officers are facing murder charges in his death. The Portland chapter of the NAACP was at the gathering today, along with Portland police condemning the violence against Nichols.
The Portland Police Bureau is part of this community and wants to give the community the service they deserve. Our authority as police officers is given. It's not a given. I'll say that again. It is given by you. It is not a given. And as much as we want people to see the humanity in police officers, we have to show humanity to those that we encounter.
The graphic police body camera footage of Nichols' beating was released last week. And although the presence of several police body cameras didn't seem to stop the officers from beating Nichols, it is sure to play a large part in their prosecution. Meanwhile, Portland police officers still don't have body cameras, making us the largest city in America whose city police force does not have body cameras. It's been a long process that keeps getting stalled. So why don't Portland police wear body cameras? Well, it's a long story. How'd we get here? In the fall of 2014, a federal judge urged the city of Portland to put cameras on its officers, even though the U.S. Justice Department did not require it back then. The mayor at the time, Charlie Hales, said, sure. The Bureau even set aside money and held some community hearings to get ideas. By 2015, things seemed to be on cruise control. The Oregon legislature passed a bill that created a statewide standard for body camera usage, and Portland City Council put aside more than $830,000 to put even more cameras in police cars. And the city pledged another $1.6 million to fund the program through the next fiscal year. Then, another year and a different mayor later, things hit a snag. Mayor Ted Wheeler questioned if the project was feasible and asked the Police Bureau for a detailed plan, including how much the cameras would actually cost. The police chief at the time, Mike Marshman, summed it up by saying, "That's in a nutshell why we don't have body cameras today." But fast forward to January of 2019, and there was another opportunity. Portland police formed a team to finally come up with that detailed plan the mayor had wanted to see. And in February 2019, the city held listening sessions. A year later, in early 2020, then Chief Jamie Resch said she supported body cameras and hoped to see a pilot program in the future. But once again, the plan hit a snag because the COVID pandemic blew out the city's budget, and the body camera pilot project was one of many things that ended up on the chopping block. Last year, City Council had more money on hand and passed funding for cameras again. They're now having vendors bid on a $2.6 million contract, which will cover both a pilot program and full implementation. And that's how we got here. The contract was awarded to the Axon Company. They will run a pilot test project to see how things work out. And the Police Bureau hopes to have the system up and running by the end of this year, by the end of 2023. But that does not mean Portland police will be wearing body cameras. There is still an argument going on between the city and the police union. As I understand it, the issue is whether officers will be able to look at their body camera video before they write their reports. The City and Justice Department do not want them to see the video first, but officers and the union do. My colleague Kyle Aboshi has reported extensively on this. He says the police union argues that viewing the video first will make the reports more accurate, but that civil rights activists argue that it is not fair and that it will let officers craft their story around what the video shows. He also reported that most police agencies in Oregon do now allow officers to see the video first, including Oregon State Police, Gresham, Forest Grove, Beaverton, and Eugene. So here's my opinion on this. First, body cameras are good. They protect good cops and they out bad cops. And while they did not stop the horrific murder of Tyree Nichols, the video will indeed hold those cops accountable. Our history is much too long and too full of stories involving police abuses. Until body cameras were required, it was often sometimes someone's word against the cops. But not anymore, at least not in most places. But it is still that way in Portland. I think that's unacceptable, and I think you should find that unacceptable. I think the city and the Justice Department should drop their argument and let the cops see the video before writing the report and get on with the business of recording police actions. It's past time for the bright light of publicity and accurate video to bring whatever justice is needed to the streets. Every other major city in America has a municipal police department wearing body cameras. It's past time for Portland to join them. At least that's my opinion. What's yours? You don't have to agree with me. I always think you should, but sometimes you have good reasons for not agreeing. You can let me know what you think. Tell me I'm full of it if you want. Email me at thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you. Up next, scientific testing has come a long way since the early 90s, but the FDA guidelines on who can give blood have been slow to catch up. Now the FDA is further easing the ban on blood donations for gay and bisexual men.
It's one of those. It's one of those policies that were put in place in part because people were scared.
We have a look at the changes being proposed when the story returns. For decades, gay and bisexual men have been barred from giving blood, even as organizations like the Red Cross report a desperate shortage in donations. Well, this year that could change. The FDA is working on new guidelines that would ease up on some of the restrictions against gay and bisexual men. Under the current rules, gay and bisexual men can only donate blood if they haven't had sex with another man for 3 months. The new proposal would allow anyone to donate after an individual risk assessment, which includes questions about recent sexual activity. They're meant to assess the HIV risk. Potential donors who've had a new sexual partner in the last 3 months or more than one sexual partner would not be eligible to give blood. The FDA instituted a lifetime ban on blood donations for men who have sex with men back in 1993. Here's Richard Young, the executive director of the Portland Gay Men's Chorus.
It's one of those policies that were put in place in part because people were scared. It was a response to an epidemic that was hitting the LGBT community quite extensively, and people were afraid that if gay people gave blood, that somehow AIDS would run rampant. And I think so, you know, there were a lot of people who couldn't give, who wanted to support the community by giving blood, that just were all of a sudden taken off the list of quote unquote acceptable donors. And it had I think it had some significant impact. One, it's a way, how do you explain to people, you know, I used to work in places that had workplace blood drives. And, you know, and at a time when I wasn't comfortable being out, you know, people will say, well, I'm going to go give blood. Are you? Oh, no, I just don't give blood. Well, why? And so it creates those those kind of conversations that maybe we're not ready to have. And so you come up with excuses of why you don't participate. And I think that in some ways was an inherent component of just kind of stoking some of the homophobia that people have around HIV/AIDS.
The lifetime ban against gay and bisexual men stayed in place until 2015, when the rule was changed to allow men to donate blood if they'd been celibate for an entire year. Then in 2020, the rule was rolled back further, reducing the celibacy time to 3 months. If the new rule goes through, blood donations from sexually active gay and bi men would be allowed if they are monogamous. The proposed changes in the blood donation rules will be open for public comment. The FDA will then review those comments and issue a final rule, likely later this year, which means that monogamous gay men could start donating blood again sometime in 2023.
Is it 100% perfect? No, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think that that's all we can ask of government at this moment, at this point in time. They're addressing a unique a need that people aren't willing to give blood right now. And so opening up the pool to a wider group of people in the long run is a good move forward. And I think the other component for me is that testing of blood is a normative. So when people give, they test blood. And so and the tests are much more effective and efficient than they were 30 years ago.
The new guidelines would still include restrictions. Men who are HIV positive are asked not to donate, even if their viral load is undetectable. And men taking the medication PrEP, which prevents HIV transmission, would also be barred from donating. Advocates say those restrictions are not necessary and stigmatizing, and that they'll continue to lobby the FDA to ease those restrictions. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We're going to wrap things up right after this. That's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow.
This is KGW News at 6:30.